Baehr, there is a new show. It's on FXX and it's called Little Demon. And the name itself gives us a little bit of insight into what this is. I'm going to just read a little bit of the promo material on this. When your father is the devil and your mother gave birth to the Antichrist, there is bound to be some conflict. What was your initial reaction to seeing this show was coming out?
Well, seeing that show is coming up is not surprising. I mean, this is the direction that our culture is going in. I just wrote an article on Marxism and the influence on the culture, abolish the family, abolish the individual. That's exactly we're following his playbook. And of course, Marx at his beginning dedicated his life to Satan when he was a teenager, and many of his followers have dedicated their life to Satan. And if you go you know, to Russia, what you do when you see in Red Square is a lot of buildings that look like they're dedicated to Satan. So it's part of the life of Marxism. The interesting thing is that it's totally despicable and just as bad as any of the promo material. We've only watched the first episode because Movieguide looks at every episode before we make a conclusion, and we don't want to watch anymore because it's so bad.
The
And
promo alone, the 2 minute, behind the scene or, first look was unimaginably bizarre to
well,
see. So, yeah.
program is worse. So whatever you think the promo is, just imagine worse. And the problem is that it's entertaining. We give stars for entertaining, so it would have to be 3 or 4 stars for entertainment and a -4 for despicable. And it's people have to know that their teenager, if they find it, is going to think that it's entertaining. I mean, it's really an incredible hook to hook people into Satanism, and Satan clubs and all this are becoming common. So the whole culture is in the midst of a satanic revolution, if you want to put it in those terms. And I can prove that, but we can't do it in a little dialogue that we're having right now.
Well, and that's, the thing about you and Movie Guide, you have been looking at content for eons now. I mean, I think you are probably the one person, I know you're the one person that we go to for these things because you have seen the trajectory, you know the history. Maybe 5 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago, and correct me if I'm wrong, something like this would have not been on TV, but it feels like the culture has shifted and changed so quickly that now this is acceptable. What is it that has shifted and changed in such a short period of time, in your view?
Well, what shifted and changed in this, and there have been, the big earth-shaking Satan movie. Let me put this in context. First place, the church was the primary, influence in Hollywood. When I went to the big convention at UCLA for lobbying groups, the Marines, my son is a Marine and he just got promoted from major to, they have a lobbying group. In fact, any movie with the Marines has a Marine Corps representative there. The Navy has one. Coca-Cola has one. It fights with Pepsi-Cola. There are all these lobbying groups. There's about 20 lobbying groups for the Muslims, about 30 for the LGBTQ, about 10 for Jews. We're the only Christian lobbying group. There are lots of prayer groups. There are lots of churches that, have a lot of entertainment. I put them in there, but we're listed with the guilds, and that is so important. One day we were at a little small dinner of about maybe 13, 14 people with Clint Eastwood. He came over to thank me for his review of Gran Torino. And I heard my wife talking to a man who had been Jewish. And he said, I became a Christian because I called your husband up and I was making a big movie like James Bond. I had to shoot in Colombia at a church. And I asked him, how would a church conduct its service? And he spent an hour and I came to Christ. So being a lobbying group makes a big difference. Well, when we stopped that, now we started it up again, but when the church, the Protestant Film Office, the Catholic Film Office closed in the 1960s, the first thing that happened is you had the first Sex and Satanism film, Rosemary's Baby, with exactly the same storyline as Little Demon. And that's been shown on TV before. So we've come a long way because Disney has now moved into that quarter. Disney, I had lunch with a friend of mine who'd been head of Disney for years. He'd been there for 27 years. He ran the whole studio. He was the top guy in distribution. And he was just heartbroken. Disney has given up on who Walt Disney is. And My cousin worked for Walt Disney. I can go on and on and on,
Well, can
but
I
there
ask you about that for a moment? And I know we're on another question, but I think what you're bringing up is really important because this FXX and FX and the other networks, they are owned by Disney. We've seen lots of anti sort of, Christian or secular content coming out from Disney, or at least content that would run counter to a Christian worldview. What in the world is going on at Disney? You're starting to speak to that a little bit, but I think it's an important thing to maybe dive into.
many of the top people that I knew who were very Christian, and some of them were, going to churchgoers like John Lasseter and went off the deep end because power corrupts, and now he's back. But a lot of those people were driven out, and I know the ones that were driven out. I know them personally, and the people that took over were not people who were concerned about family. One of the studio heads had, in the old days, Walt Disney required anybody that worked there would go to the park and dress as a character to meet the families and kids. Now there are people that don't want to go to the park. They don't want to dress in a Mickey Mouse or Minnie Mouse. They don't want to be part of the family culture. They've abandoned the family culture. So it's not Disney anymore. Walt would be shocked. He was named after his father's best friend, who was the pastor of his church, and his pastor of his church named his son after Walt's father. And Walt, if you read his autobiography, not his biography, his autobiography, talks about every day he read the Bible and he prayed. So we've got a now you can accuse him of other things. He also, went to the Common Masonic Lodge and stuff, and that you can get angry. And a lot of people did because they just thought it was a club. But in his autobiography, his commitment to prayer, his commitment to the Bible was very strong. And my cousin was his right hand man for a long time, and he had a strong commitment, and he wanted to make family. He didn't want to make them to be biblical stories, although many of them are biblical stories. And if you look at some of the Davy Crockett and the other ones, they're extremely Christian. So he did Christian stuff. They've kicked out the Christians. They've moved in the other direction. There's some left, and their hearts are broken. I mean, the head of animation was a friend. He was a Christian. The head of marketing was a friend. He was a Christian. The head of distribution was a friend. He was a Christian. So this has all gone downhill. And I'm hoping that when people see the nosedive of the figures, every year we do the figures, and Disney is taking a nosedive. Last year, 90% of the top grossing film contained content or worldview that was Christian, and often a strong Christian. Only 10% contained non Christian, anti Christian worldview. It's the same thing in streaming. People want the good, so they choose the good. Now, the good news about your program today is you're telling people not to go on this and to watch out for their kids going on it. So you're making a difference. You're doing exactly what we need to do to get the word out so families all over the country say, watch out for little demon.
Absolutely, because it's deceptive since it's animated, right? And a lot of parents are rushing around. They're not necessarily checking what their kids are watching, and you're trusting the iPad, which we shouldn't be, but people are, to sort of, entertain their children. And there are a number of things, just before I go to the next question about Disney, that I also find interesting in light of what you just said. When you look at the numbers, there have been a number of polls, and they're different polls, so the comparisons are tough. But you had, even a year or two ago, Disney at 60, 70% approval among Americans. And there was one poll showing 33% of, the country was trusting Disney. And so you're seeing that decline. And this is a brand that everybody loved. That's what's so sad about sort of watching this happen. But to sort of pivot back to this little demon conversation, one of the things, and I know you've looked at this a lot, and I'd love to get your reaction to this. We consistently see these Hollywood projects that come out, and in particular, Little Demon, where you have different characters that are adult. You have the Satan character in this, you have the mother, but the child at the center of it, who's one of the main characters, this is on a network where we're trying to reach 18 to 34-year-olds, and yet you have a 13-year-old girl as a character. That's a little strange to me. Why are there these young characters in these sorts of projects?
A lot of them even go younger than teenagers, but the teenager is I teach cognitive development theory and media literacy, and I was head of a department at Berkeley and blah, blah, blah. And, I've had a woman 2 years ago who's a medical advisor and her daughter was cutting. I said she's in the self-esteem stage of cognitive development, teenager, and they look at themselves and they feel that they don't fit in. And if they have a spot on their shirt, they think everybody's looking at them. So it's a very vulnerable stage, in spite of the foolishness of people say that they can make decisions at that stage. When I have done this for years, over 600,000 studies on the influence of the media on different stages of cognitive development. We know that kids don't fully mature until their 20s. That's why we had drinking laws and voting laws and et cetera in their 20s. And now we're saying that they can watch this. They can't watch it. They're decision making, but they're also at the vulnerable stage of saying, I don't fit in. How am I going to fit in? And this girl who was cutting herself, I sent her my book, Culture Wise Family. She read that chapter on that age group. The girl converted to Jesus Christ, and she started counseling her friends who were having trouble. So, what we need is to teach them media and cultural wisdom, not to be scared of it. We just need to teach them to have the right values, to understand they're not going to get self esteem by becoming a Satanist.
Yeah. Well, and it's, it's interesting because as you sort of look at these scenarios, you also wonder, are they intentionally putting a 13-year-old character in so younger people will watch it, even though they're saying, you wonder these things because you see it with Euphoria and all these other shows.
It's not a wonder. I mean, people have asked me that for years, and many friends in the entertainment industry. When you make a movie, which is our area, and it costs $105 million now, you know every scene that's in the movie. It may not work, but that's not because they didn't want it there. They know everything that's in that movie, and they know everything that's in the show. I just talked to a friend of mine a couple of hours ago who only does. You know, animated movies. His father was a pastor, his grandfather was a pastor. He always puts Christian virtues in. I mean, they're not necessarily Christian. He's doing one series, he's in the middle of another series that teaches, all the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, good. But it doesn't say it overtly. And one of his movies made $14 billion at the box office, etc. So he knows that this does better. A little demon will not do well because it won't reach many people, but you've got to teach your kids to be media wise.
Well, and that was going to be my final question for you, and I think you just spoke to it a little bit, but I'll throw it to you for a little more insight there because there are parents who are watching right now or listening, and they're beside themselves or they're worried because maybe they didn't even realize that this is something that was happening. What would you say to parents about just the monitoring of what their kids are watching? What's your advice to them in this crazy arena with so much access to media?
Well, parents have a tremendously big problem today because the average child, by the time they're 17, has spent 64,000 hours with the media and about 18,000 hours in school and about 11,000 down the line to a couple of thousand hours with parents, according to Cornell University, not according to me. And so the parents are overwhelmed. They're working, they're tired, they got to put up with this. They can't watch the teenager. So you have to teach the teenager or any age of child to be media wise. And I have two books on that: The Media Wise Family and The Culture Wise Family, and then an application called Reel to Reel. And that means now these books come out of 62 professors that got together in the late 70s and put together the first media literacy course. They're very solid books. And the first one has little exercises that you can do, looking at color, looking at different things, because that's what you just asked. How can they put this in? Well, I mean, it's like Little Demon, there's a lot of red for Satan. There's a lot of things that are just evil in it. And you can see that in the colors and everything else in it. Everything is intentional in there. And you've got to help them to say, now, what does this mean? For instance, when one of my sons was little, they were watching a show about, I think it was Mississippi or Alabama, where some women were lesbians, and they were the town had gotten after them, and it made the townspeople sitting straight back. My son said, and he's like 12 or 13. They made the women, the town look evil, and the church people look evil, and the women look like friendly, lovable grandparent figures. And that's what they do. So you're going to have kids tempted unless they learn to ask the right questions.
Well, listen, I so appreciate your time today. And it's movieguide.org. And the books you just mentioned are great resources for families. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Have a great day.